I had always imagined that winning the lottery would feel like an explosion of joy. Bells ringing in my chest, my feet leaving the ground, maybe even a tear or two sliding down my cheek. But when the numbers appeared on the screen that night, perfectly matching the ones I'd been playing for 3 years, I didn't jump or shout. I just sat there in the stillness of my kitchen, my heart thudding slow and heavy, the reality settling in like a quiet tide. $2 million. I could already hear Margaret's gentle laugh in my mind, see her shaking her head and telling me to put it somewhere safe. I could picture little Ellis, my late brother's boy, running through the backyard, holding a kite string like it was the key to the sky. Every number on that ticket was a memory, a piece of my life. 7, Margaret's birthday. 14, Tatum's birthday. 23, Finnegan's. 31, Rodri's. 42, our wedding anniversary. And the bonus, 18, for Ellis. Every month for the past 3 years, I had walked into Miller's corner store, paid my 20 and filled in those same numbers. Not because I was desperate to win, but because it felt like holding on to the people I loved, even the ones who were gone. This time, though, it wasn't just a ritual, it was a miracle. But I didn't tell a soul. Instead, I decided to test something I wasn't entirely sure I wanted the answer to: my family's loyalty. So I called them one by one and asked for help. Not a fortune, just enough to see if they'd stand by me the way I'd stood by them my whole life. Every single one refused. They each had their reasons, their excuses, their walls. Maybe they thought I was just an old man living on a meager pension, too proud to admit I was struggling. Everyone, except one. But that part of the story comes later. That autumn afternoon, the lottery ticket was still fresh in my pocket when I heard Tatum's voice slicing through the air before her car door had even slammed shut. "Dad, what's wrong with you?" she barked, her heels hitting the wet driveway in sharp, impatient clicks. I slipped the ticket into my shirt pocket and tried to keep my voice calm. "Good afternoon to you too, sweetheart." She didn't knock. The screen door banged open, and there she was, hair frizzed from the drizzle, mascara smudged, her salon uniform wrinkled from a long shift. "I saw you at Miller's," she said, standing in the kitchen doorway like a prosecutor about to deliver the final blow. $20, Dad. 20 whole dollars on the lottery, while I'm canceling appointments because I can't even afford get. Before I could answer, she reached over and snatched the ticket from my pocket. "These stupid numbers," she scoffed. "You think you're going to win? You think some magical fairy's going to make us rich?" "Give that back, Tatum," I said, my voice low. "No." She held it above her head like evidence in a trial. "Do you know I owe $1,850 for Kayla and Mason's school supplies? And here you are, throwing money away on fantasy land." I rose slowly, my knees groaning under the effort. "I've given you $3,200 this year, Tatum. Finnegan got $4,800. Rodri, $2,100. Do you want me to count every grocery bill I've covered? Every electric payment? Every emergency car repair?" Her face flushed crimson. "That's different. That's family helping family." "And this," I said, my voice tightening, "is my money helping my hope." She laughed, but it wasn't warm. It was sharp, bitter. "Your hope, Dad? You're 68 years old. You live on a pension and Social Security. Every dollar counts." "Every dollar I earned," I corrected quietly. "Every dollar I saved working double shifts at the factory so you kids could have decent clothes and packed lunches. Every dollar I didn't spend on myself so you could have more." She didn't answer, just clutched the ticket tighter. "I'm not asking for much," she finally said. "You're asking for everything," I replied, my voice suddenly harder than I meant it to be. "Finnegan wants my investments. Rodri wants my emergency fund. You want my lottery money. When do I get to want something?" Her eyes narrowed. "What you want is stupid. What I want," I said, "is mine." The kitchen clock ticked in the silence between us. Outside, rain tapped against the glass like it was counting down the seconds to something we couldn't see. Finally, she threw the ticket onto the table with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "Fine. Waste your money, but don't come crying to me when you're eating cat food because you spent your last 20 on pipe dreams." I picked it up and folded it carefully, the paper whispering against my fingers. She didn't know it yet, but that pipe dream was real, and she had just told me exactly where she stood. And because of that, she'd never see a single cent of it. The front door slammed so violently that the coffee cups in the cabinet rattled against their saucers like startled teeth. Through the rain-streaked window, I caught a last glimpse of Tatum's Toyota as it fishtailed slightly on the wet gravel. The red glow of her taillights burned for a moment in the gray drizzle saw before vanishing around the bend, leaving only the slow hiss of rain and the uneven rhythm of my own breathing. I stood there for a long moment, the house feeling too big, too hollow. On the table, the lottery ticket lay where she had thrown it. I picked it up gently, smoothing the sharp creases her angry fingers had pressed into it. The paper felt fragile, but not as fragile as the quiet between us. The number stared back at me. 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, and the bonus 18. Once they had been symbols of joy, birthdays, anniversaries, milestones that had meant cake, balloons, and the sound of my family's laughter echoing through these very walls. Now they felt different, less like celebrations, more like accusations. Hours passed. Outside, autumn darkness slid over Milford like a heavy blanket. The rain continued, soft and persistent, tapping against the windows as if reminding me I wasn't entirely alone. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, the lottery ticket lying beside yesterday's newspaper. I told myself not to think about her words, but they clung like damp clothes. Waste of money, pipe dream, cat food. I decided to cook just to keep my hands busy. The smell of chicken broth began to fill the kitchen, the steam curling in the air above the pot. I stirred slowly, watching the noodles swirl and the carrots bob, pretending for a moment that this was any ordinary evening. That was when my phone rang. The caller ID lit up with Finnegan's name. My middle child. I hesitated before answering, already guessing why he was calling. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice careful, measured in the way people speak when they think they need to steer you toward the right decision. I leaned against the counter, wooden spoon still in hand. "Evening, Finn. Tatum called me earlier," he continued. "She's pretty upset." "I imagine she is," I said, my tone flat. "She told me you bought another lottery ticket today. $20. "That's correct." There was a pause. I could hear the faint click of his keyboard in the background. He was probably still at his downtown office, bathed in fluorescent light, also chasing some project to prove to his bosses just how indispensable he was. "Dad, we've talked about this before," he said in the same tone a parent might use with a child. $20 might not seem like much, but it adds up. That's $240 a year. Over 5 years, that's $1,200. I allowed myself a thin smile. "Mathematics was always your strong suit, son." "I'm being serious," his voice sharpened. "You're on a fixed income. Every expense should be carefully considered." My hand tightened around the phone. "Like the $7,300 in credit card debt you couldn't cover last year? The debt I paid off so your credit wouldn't be destroyed?" Silence, then more quietly, "That was different." "How so?" "It was an investment opportunity that didn't pan out. And this," I said, turning the burner off under the soup, "is my investment in hope." "Hope doesn't pay bills, Dad." "Neither," I said, my voice calm but edged. "Did your cryptocurrency venture, or your friend's restaurant, or that multi-level marketing scheme you swore would make you rich." "That's not fair. Those were calculated risks based on market research." "No," I interrupted, my patience thinning. "They were gambles, just like this ticket. The only difference is that when you gambled and lost, I was there to pick up the pieces. But when I gamble," I looked down at the ticket lying beside the stove, "I'm suddenly reckless, foolish, irresponsible." There was no answer, only the low hum of the phone line and the rain against the window. "The only difference," I said quietly, "is that I admit what mine is." On the other end, Finnegan let out a long theatrical sigh, the kind that carried both exasperation and condescension. "Look, Dad, I'm not trying to control your life. I'm trying to help you make smart financial decisions. Mom always said, don't." The word shot out sharper than I'd intended, like a door slammed in the middle of a sentence. "Don't use your mother to justify treating me like a child." That's not what I'm doing, he protested. Isn't it? I countered. You call me up to lecture me over $20, while I send you $400 every month for your so-called emergencies. There was a pause, short but heavy. I pressed on before he could regroup. When was the last time you asked how I was doing? The last time you came by just to visit, not to pick something up or drop off another request? The clicking of his keyboard stopped. I imagined him sitting back in his ergonomic chair, trying to decide which careful sentence would get him out of this. I care about you, Dad. We all do. That's why we worry when we see you making poor choices. Poor choices. The phrase echoed in my head like an insult dressed in concern. I turned my eyes toward the refrigerator, where the lottery ticket was pinned under a sunflower-shaped magnet. Margaret's favorite. $20 for the chance to imagine a different life. $20 for 30 seconds of what if. Finnegan, I said slowly, I need to ask you something. Sure. If I won that lottery, really won it, what would you do? He chuckled. Dad, the odds are like 20 million to 1. That's not what I asked. There was a longer pause this time, as though he sensed there was more weight in the question than I'd let on. I'd be happy for you, of course, he said finally, his voice measured. And I'd hope you'd be smart about it. You know, get financial advice. Make sure it was invested properly. Invested properly? By whom? Well, I have experience with financial planning. That was all I needed to hear. I hung up. The abrupt buzz of the dial tone filled my ear for a few seconds before I set the phone back in its cradle. The soup on the stove had stopped bubbling. The kitchen felt colder somehow, like whatever warmth had been left in the room had drained out through the phone line along with my patience. I walked to the refrigerator and looked again at the ticket. 7, Margaret's birthday. 14, Tatum's. 23, Finnegan's. 31, Rodri's. 42, our wedding anniversary. Bonus 18, 4 Ellis, my family reduced to numbers that might mean nothing at all, or might mean everything. 8 days until the drawing. 8 days of screening my children's calls. 8 days of eating quiet dinners at the kitchen table. 8 days of wondering when exactly I had stopped being a father and started being a bank account with legs. When Thursday evening arrived, I found myself in my recliner, the TV remote balanced on my knee, flipping channels without caring what was on. At night, the house felt too big, its shadows stretching across the floor like they were reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. Margaret's furniture was gone now. I'd sold most of it after she passed. Too many memories for one man to carry alone. Channel 7 flickered into focus just as the upbeat chime of the lottery broadcast began. Jennifer Martinez, who had been drawing numbers in our county for 15 years, smiled at the camera with the kind of practiced warmth that never reached her eyes. Good evening, Ohio, she began. Tonight's jackpot stands at $1 million. Let's see if we have a winner. I reached for my coffee, only to find the cup empty. The ticket sat on the side table, tucked behind a photograph of Margaret holding baby Tatum, her face glowing in the golden light of that summer afternoon. I'd moved the ticket from the refrigerator after Finnegan's call, kept it closer, almost like I was protecting it. The first number tonight, Jennifer's voice rang out, is 7. My hand froze halfway to the coffee cup. The second number, 14. I didn't breathe. My fingers twitched toward the ticket, fumbling like they'd forgotten how to work. 7, 14, Margaret's birthday, Tatum's birthday. My pulse kicked hard in my neck. The third number is 23, Finnegan's birthday. I pulled the ticket closer to the lamp, my eyes darting between the printed numbers and the glowing television screen, afraid to blink in case reality shifted while I wasn't looking. This can't be happening, I whispered, though my voice barely made a sound in the still kitchen. The fourth number, 31, Rodri's birthday. Something inside me lurched, like my heart was trying to claw its way out through my ribs. I read the ticket again, then again. My eyes blurred and I had to blink hard to bring the numbers back into focus. Surely I was making a mistake. The fifth number tonight is 42. Our wedding anniversary, October 4th, 1982. 42 years of marriage. A lifetime compressed into 2 digits. The sound of her laugh, the way she'd tap her coffee mug twice before taking a sip. The scent of lavender on her sweater. Every piece of her, distilled into that single number. And tonight's bonus number, 18. Ellis, my nephew, the boy I barely knew but loved anyway, the only child of my brother, gone far too soon. I'd added 18 on a whim 3 years ago, thinking it was only right that families should stick together, even on a lottery ticket. Jennifer Martinez's voice kept going, saying something about checking numbers carefully, about claim procedures, about winners having 180 days to come forward. But it all came to me muffled, like I was hearing her from the bottom of a swimming pool. I stood too quickly. The blood rushed from my head, and I nearly dropped the ticket. $1 million. I stumbled into the kitchen, legs unsteady, and spread the ticket flat on the counter under the bright overhead light. 7, 14, 23, 31, 42. Bonus 18. The number stared up at me, innocent as rain. I'd chosen them because they meant family. Birthdays, anniversaries, the dates that marked our lives like thumbtacks on a map. And now they had turned into something almost unreal. Margaret would have laughed first, then shaken her head at the irony. The same family that had spent the week calling me foolish, rolling their eyes, and telling me I was wasting my money, had just made me a millionaire. $700,000 after taxes, according to the anchor's voice. More money than I'd earned in the last 10 years combined. More than my father had seen in his entire lifetime, working the coal mines of Kentucky, his lungs blackened and his hands cracked from years of dust and cold. But standing there with $1 million scrap of paper in my hands, I wasn't thinking about the money. I was thinking about Tatum's fingers snatching this ticket from my pocket, waving it in my face like proof of my foolishness. I was thinking about Finnegan's careful voice lecturing me about poor financial choices while ignoring his own. I was thinking about how fast they could calculate what I owed them and how they never once calculated what they owed me. The ticket felt heavier now, not just with possibility, but with something darker. A quiet, deliberate sense of power, maybe even revenge. I walked down the hallway to my bedroom, my footsteps slow, deliberate. From the back of my closet, I pulled out the small safe where I kept Margaret's jewelry, our marriage license, the deed to the house. The ticket slid inside, right next to her wedding ring. The paper looked small, almost unimpressive, lying there among the weight of my life. Before closing the safe, I stared at it one last time. Tomorrow, I thought, I would call my children. And when I did, the conversation would be on my terms. Tomorrow, I would invite them all to dinner at the Rusty Anchor, our old family haunt, where we'd celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and graduations back when being together meant something. Tomorrow, I'd watch them closely, read the small changes in their eyes and voices when they believed there was nothing left for them to gain. The safe door clicked shut behind me, the metallic sound sharp and final, like a judge's gavel striking wood. A decision had been made, and there was no turning back. When morning came, sunlight spilled into my bedroom in pale gold stripes, cutting across the worn quilt Margaret had made years ago. I turned the combination dial on her old jewelry safe, 3 turns to the right, 2 left, 1 right, my fingertips remembering the sequence before my mind did. Inside, the ticket lay exactly where I'd placed it 12 hours earlier, nestled beside Margaret's engagement ring and our marriage certificate. $1 million reduced to a fragile slip of paper smaller than a business card. I carried it to the kitchen, where the table became my war room. I spread out my documents in neat, deliberate rows. Driver's license, social security card, the printed lottery claim form I downloaded at 6 that morning. It felt like assembling a battle plan. Each paper another step toward transforming those numbers into real money resting safely in my account. The drive to the post office took 15 quiet minutes through Milford's tree-lined streets. Maple leaves had begun to gather along the curbs, their golds and crimsons layering the pavement like a quilt. The air was crisp enough to sting my lungs in a way I liked. It made everything feel sharper, more possible. I parked between a rusted-out pickup and a spotless SUV with a soccer decal on the back window. The manila envelope was tucked under my arm, its thin weight belying the gravity of what it carried. Certified mail, I told the postal clerk, a woman about my age, her hair silvering at the temples, her eyes holding that easy warmth of someone who'd learned to slow down. She placed my envelope on the digital scale, her fingers light but precise. $8.50 with return receipt, she said. That's fine. I handed her a 10, watching as she pressed the green label in place. That sticker would track my ticket's journey to Columbus like a heartbeat on a monitor. How long for delivery? I asked. 2 business days, usually. Important documents, she added, almost as an afterthought. You could say that, I replied. Back home, the kitchen felt smaller somehow, the autumn light slanting in at a lower angle. I sat at the table with the phone in front of me, its silent presence feeling almost like a weapon I was about to wield. On the notepad lay 3 names, 3 numbers, my children. It was time for them to learn exactly who they were when stripped of expectations, when they thought there was no payday at the end of the road. Tatum answered on the second ring, her voice already edged with the kind of irritation that comes from being interrupted mid-task. Dad, I'm between clients. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. I kept my tone even, light. I wanted to invite you to dinner Saturday night. The whole family. A pause. Behind her voice, I could hear the hum of hair dryers, overlapping chatter. The pop music salons always played to make the air feel busier than it was. Dinner at your house? The rusty anchor, I said, my treat. There was the faintest shift in her tone, like a curtain being drawn back to reveal a sunnier scene. Annoyance replaced by something warmer, but only because she'd heard the magic words, I'm paying. If you're paying, then why not? She said. Can I bring the kids? Kayla's got soccer at 4, but we could be there by 6. Bring them. I'll make reservations for 7 people. 7? Who else is coming? Your brothers, Finnegan's wife. A family gathering. I didn't tell her it would be more than that. I didn't tell her it would be a test. One last quiet measure of who still valued the man and who only valued the money. She laughed, a short, brittle sound that held no trace of joy, like glass cracking under strain. When's the last time we all had dinner together? She asked. I didn't have to think. Mom's funeral. The words hit harder than she probably intended, but they landed just the same, slicing through the thin layer of composure I'd been holding on to. Margaret's funeral had been 2 years ago, 2 long, hollow years, and yes, she was right. That might very well have been the last time my children and I had sat at the same table, sharing the same air. Saturday, 6 o'clock, I said, keeping my voice steady. Don't be late. I hung up before she could press for answers and immediately reached for the next number on my notepad, Finnegan's office. Whitaker and Associates, came the crisp, trained voice of his secretary. Finnegan Whitaker, please. This is his father. A brief hold, then his voice came through, smooth, professional, guarded. Dad, everything all right? You never call the office. I'm calling to invite you to dinner. Saturday night, the Rusty Anchor, 6 o'clock, family dinner. Silence stretched across the line, thick and telling. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the quiet clink of calculations as he searched for the angle, the hidden meaning behind the words. What's the occasion, Dad? This isn't like you. Can't a father invite his family to dinner? Of course, but... He hesitated, and when he spoke again, there was that wary note in his voice. Is this about the lottery ticket thing? Are you trying to prove a point about family unity? His question revealed more about him than I think he realized. Everything was a chessboard to Finnegan, every gesture a move to be analyzed, every interaction a contest to be won. I'm trying to have dinner with my children. Will you come or not? We'll be there, but Dad, if this is some kind of intervention about your spending habits... 6 o'clock, Finnegan. And don't lecture me about my habits until you've paid off your own debts. I ended the call, harder than necessary, and punched in the last number. Roderick. The phone rang 5 times before a groggy voice answered. Yeah, it's your father, I said. A yawn came through the line. Dinner? He sounded like he'd just rolled out of bed, probably after closing the bar at 3 in the morning. Saturday night, 6 o'clock, the Rusty Anchor. Sure, I could eat. That place has good steaks. Who's paying? And there it was, the question that had become almost a family motto. I am, obviously. Cool. 6 o'clock Saturday, got it. The line went dead without a goodbye. I sat back in my chair and looked down at my notepad. 3 calls, 3 yeses, 3 different ways of asking who would foot the bill. Not one of them had asked why I wanted to see them. Not one had asked how I was doing. Not one had wondered if there was something special about gathering together after so long. Just the unspoken assumption that if I was calling, it was to give them something. Saturday would be the day I finally learned what kind of people I had raised. Not in the abstract way parents sometimes reflect, but in a tangible, undeniable truth that could no longer be softened by nostalgia or wishful thinking. By the time evening fell, autumn had already drawn its heavy curtains across the sky, wrapping the rusty anchor's parking lot in that particular kind of darkness that comes early and lingers like an uninvited guest. I arrived first, just as I had planned. Old habits die hard. Margaret used to tease me about my need to claim the ground before everyone else. Tonight, that instinct felt more like armor. I chose our old spot without hesitation, the round table in the back corner. Margaret always insisted on it for birthdays, anniversaries, and the rare Sunday lunches when we could gather everyone without excuses. Back then, the corner felt cozy. Tonight, it felt like a vantage point. Linda, our waitress for over 15 years, approached with a warm, knowing smile and a pot of coffee. She didn't need to ask my order. "Family dinner tonight, Mr. Whitaker? Haven't seen everyone together in a while." I gave her a faint smile. Something like that. She poured the coffee, and I took the seat with my back to the wall, not for comfort, but for strategy. I wanted to see every arrival, every expression, every flicker of body language that might reveal the truth. Tatum was first. Well, first in the loosest sense. She swept in at 6:15, her entrance brisk but distracted, with her 2 kids orbiting her like reluctant satellites. Kayla, 12, had her earbuds firmly in place, eyes locked on her phone as if the screen might be more real than the people in the room. Mason, 9, barely glanced at me before asking if the restaurant had Wi-Fi. Neither child spoke a word to me until Tatum, with a sharp elbow, prompted them. "Say hello to Grandpa." "Hi," they mumbled in unison, their voices flat, eyes already scanning the room for empty chairs far from the adults. I remembered when they used to run into my arms. At 6:20 sharp, Finnegan arrived with Sarah. His timing, like everything else about him, was deliberate, punctuality used as a quiet weapon. Sarah, as always, was warm and gracious, leaning down to squeeze my shoulder with genuine affection. She was the only one so far who seemed happy to be here. Finnegan, meanwhile, studied the table like a general assessing the battlefield. His gaze flicked over each seat, each menu, each detail. Not for comfort, but for positioning. Roderick made his entrance at 6:35, unhurried as ever, his hair still damp from what was clearly a last-minute shower. He wore that same battered leather jacket he had owned since college. The one Margaret used to say smelled like trouble. He dropped into his chair like he owned the place and waved Linda over for a beer before even greeting anyone. "Sorry I'm late, traffic was murder." We all knew there hadn't been traffic in Milford on a Saturday night since the factory closed a decade ago, but no one bothered to call him on the lie. Linda took our drink orders, and I sat back, watching them fall into their familiar rhythms. Tatum opened her menu directly to the lowest price section, lips moving silently as she calculated totals. Finnegan lingered over the wine list like a man reviewing a high-stakes contract. Roderick, without so much as a glance, ordered the most expensive steak on the menu, the same way he always had. "So, Dad," Tatum began, her voice bright but edged, "about the kids' school expenses we talked about." "Let's order first," I cut in, not ready for the conversation to start tilting in that direction. But she pressed on, ignoring the signal. "Mason needs new soccer cleats, and Kayla's science project is going to require supplies I just can't afford right now. Not with the salon being slow and winter coming." "Mom, can we get dessert?" Kayla asked without looking up from her phone. "If Grandpa's paying," Tatum answered automatically, the words so reflexive they barely seemed to register as a statement about money, though they landed like a stone in my gut. I sipped my coffee, letting the bitter heat steady me. So far, nothing surprised me. But the night was still young. Finnegan cleared his throat, not the unconscious kind, meant to clear the airways, but the deliberate, familiar sound of someone used to having the whole room fall silent and wait for him to speak. He straightened his back, placed both hands on the table as if preparing to present an investment proposal to a board of directors. Actually, Dad, he began, his voice low and deliberate, Sarah and I have talked a lot about your financial situation. Those lottery tickets, they're nothing more than throwing money out the window. If you trust me, I could double your savings in 6 months by investing in the stock market. Rodri gave a short, mocking laugh, leaned back in his chair, and took a long pull from his beer. Here we go again, he muttered, just loudly enough for everyone to hear. Investment advice from the guy who burned through 7 grand on crypto. Finnegan immediately turned toward him, eyes flashing with rebuttal. That was a calculated risk based on market analysis, he shot back defensively. A far cry from throwing money at random numbers on a lottery ticket. Rodri shrugged, a smirk tugging at his lips. Trust me, Dad, I know gambling. 3 years at the poker table taught me how to read people's eyes and calculate odds. And the result? The house always wins. Always. Sarah, seated between them like a fragile footbridge over a raging river, tried to cool the tension. Maybe tonight, we could just enjoy dinner and not talk about Dad's questionable decisions? Tatum, who had been silent for most of the meal, suddenly spoke. Her voice edged like a shard of glass hidden in a pocket for weeks, now cutting into the air. While you're wasting money on lottery tickets, I'm having to choose between buying groceries and putting gas in the car. Mason, apparently oblivious to the thickening atmosphere, looked up from his tablet just long enough to ask, Can we go home now? This is boring. I sat there, fingers wrapped around my still warm coffee cup, watching every word, every glance, every biting smirk. They were tearing apart my choices like vultures descending on a carcass. Every comment was about money. Every so-called concern carried an undertone of steering my finances their way. Every criticism assumed I was too old, too foolish, and too outdated to manage my own life. When the main course arrived, the topic shifted, but only slightly. Now it was about them, their exhausting hums, their mounting debts, their financially supported plans which somehow always began with my wallet. Rodri casually mentioned his rent was coming due. Finnegan hinted at a business expansion that needed a small infusion of capital. Tatum began calculating, weighing, aloud, how much the kids' Christmas would cost this year. Not once did anyone ask how my health was. No one wondered about my loneliness or about my memories of their mother, the woman they once called their everything. Not a single thank you for the thousands of dollars I'd already given them in just the past year. They spoke about me as if I weren't even there, discussing my capacity and my assets, as though divvying up a deal that had already been decided. When Linda brought the check, I reached for my wallet, pulled out my credit card, and was startled to realize my hand was steadier than it had been in a long time. Across the table, my children watched intently, like auditors reviewing every figure. Thanks for dinner, Dad, Tatum said, gathering her purse and calling for the kids. Make sure you think about the school expenses in my investment proposal, Finnegan added hopefully. I'll send you some research materials. Rodri gave a wordless nod, the kind of half-acknowledgement that said more about his hurry than his manners, and slipped toward the door, likely already cutting it close for his evening shift. Then they were all gone, dispersing to their separate lives, leaving me alone at the round table in the corner. The plates were empty now, crumbs scattered like the remains of a feast no one had truly savored. The faint trace of Sarah's perfume still lingered in the air. Hers had been the only genuine embrace I'd received all night. Around me, the restaurant carried on with its usual Saturday night pulse, clinking glasses, bursts of laughter, the comforting hum of conversation. I couldn't help but notice other tables, grandparents being pulled into giggling hugs by wide-eyed children, families leaning close to share stories, not just bills. At those tables, connection still existed. At mine, only absence remained. Linda, steady as ever after 15 years of service to our family, approached with her coffee pot. Refill, Mr. Whitaker? She asked, her voice gentle. I shook my head. No thanks, Linda. I think I have learned everything I needed to know tonight. The next morning, Sunday, the truth settled in as plainly as the golden light spilling through my kitchen windows. The air was cool and sharp with early autumn, the kind that makes the world feel clearer, cleaner. mercilessly so. I sat at my own kitchen table, a fresh cup of coffee steaming beside a blank notebook. My pen hovered, but my thoughts were already sharp and certain. My children had been tested last night without even realizing it, and they had failed, spectacularly. Thursday's phone calls had hinted at it, but the dinner confirmed it without question. To them, I wasn't a father anymore. I was a bank account, a resource to be tapped when convenient, with withdrawals disguised as help or opportunities. Their only emotions toward me were irritation when I hesitated to hand over money and mild impatience at having to justify the request in the first place. I opened the notebook and wrote 3 names in careful, deliberate script across the top of the page: Tatum, Finnegan, Rodri. Beneath each, I began to outline a different kind of trial. One final test for each, a last chance to prove they deserved even a single dollar from my lottery winnings. Tatum's test came to me first. It had to touch her greatest flaw, her unshakable belief that my resources existed solely for her convenience. She needed to face a situation where compassion mattered more than cash. I decided on a health scare, serious enough to demand her presence, but not life-threatening. The kind of thing a loving daughter wouldn't think twice about showing up for. On the clean page, I wrote, Monday morning, 10:00 a.m., heart palpitations, need ride to doctor, see if she'll leave the salon during a busy time. The brilliance of this plan was in its realism. At my age, 68, heart trouble wasn't an outrageous claim. Since Margaret's passing, I'd had occasional irregular beats, which my doctor chalked up to stress. Tatum didn't know that. All she would see was her father in potential danger. How she reacted would tell me everything I needed to know. A truly loving daughter would drop everything: clients, deadlines, convenience, just to make sure her father got to a doctor in time. A selfish one would sigh into the phone, suggest calling an ambulance, or politely recommend I ask someone else. That was the heart of Tatum's test. Not about the money, not about the ride, about where I ranked in her list of priorities when life demanded an immediate choice. Finnegan's trial had to be different. His weakness was never indifference. It was control, wrapped in the smug certainty that his way was always superior. He lived in the unshakable belief that my years of experience could never match his shiny, self-proclaimed financial genius. For him, I scribbled down, Tuesday afternoon, 2:00 p.m. Found savings bonds worth $12,000. Ask for investment guidance. See if he offers genuine help or tries to take control. This one would be a mirror, reflecting his true intent back to him. Would he look at me and see a man capable of making his own choices? Or would he immediately shift into the role of self-appointed money manager, treating me like a doddering old fool who couldn't be trusted with a dime? I wasn't interested in clever strategies or market predictions. I wanted to know if he could put me before the money. Rodri's challenge had to strike at his Achilles' heel, his easygoing detachment, that tendency to treat other people's crises as passing inconveniences. For him, I wrote, Wednesday evening, 7:00 p.m., lost wallet with pension money at grocery store. Need help searching, filing police report. See if he shows up or makes excuses. Timing was everything here. Wednesday nights at the bar were primed for good tips, and walking away would cost him. A son who truly cared would put his father's emergency ahead of a few hours' pay. A self-absorbed one would tell me to check with the store manager or file something online while he kept pouring drinks. Each of these little dramas was crafted with precision, urgent enough to demand an immediate reaction, yet believable enough to mask my true intentions. None of them were impossible situations. They were the sort of problems people my age faced all the time. Medical scares, forgotten assets, misplaced essentials. Life's ordinary ambushes. I set clear markers for passing and failing. Passing meant they'd respond with real concern, with urgency, and with a willingness to put aside their own needs. Failing meant delay, deflection, or treating my troubles as an inconvenience that interrupted their real lives. The coffee in my cup cooled as I fine-tuned the scenarios. The kitchen was quiet except for the faint ticking of the wall clock, each second pulling me closer to the moment of truth. I would give them their final chances without them even realizing it. And if all three failed, I knew exactly what I'd do. In 2 weeks' time, Ellis would get a call. My nephew had called me twice since Margaret's funeral. Not to borrow money, not to ask a favor, just to check in, just to ask how I was holding up. He lived 4 hours away, had his own demanding job, his own bills, his own life to manage. Yet somehow, in the middle of all that, he still found time to care about mine. In those 2 short conversations, he'd shown more genuine concern for my happiness than my own children had managed in years. Meanwhile, the lottery ticket, worth $700,000 after taxes, remained locked in my safe. I didn't see it as just a piece of paper with numbers. To me, it was the tangible result of a lifetime of effort, sacrifice, and the values Margaret and I had tried to live by. It was enough to change someone's life completely, enough to provide security, opportunity, and freedom from the grinding fear of financial instability. It deserved to go to someone who would understand its worth not only in dollars, but in the human cost of earning it. The long hours, the sacrifices, the missed vacations, the careful planning. I glanced at the kitchen clock, 9:30 a.m. In half an hour, I would be placing the first of 3 calls that would decide the fate of that ticket. Today was Tatum's test. I knew exactly what she would be doing, flitting between her clients, mixing DAWs, chatting about their weekend adventures while hairdryers hummed and the scent of chemicals lingered in the air. Mondays were her busiest day, and that was the point. A loving daughter would set aside her scissors and foils for her father. A selfish one would not. I stared at the phone on the table. Somehow it seemed heavier today, as if it understood the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just a call, it was a reckoning. In 30 minutes, I would find out whether I had raised a daughter or simply financed the comfortable childhood of a stranger who happened to share my DNA. Monday morning carried with it a sense of finality. I sat at my kitchen table, the notebook open to Tatum's page. My hand hovered over the phone like a surgeon hesitating before a high-stakes incision. The lottery ticket's numbers, now committed to memory, mocked me from inside the safe, whispering that $1 million was waiting for someone worthy. At exactly 10:30, I dialed. "Glamour Touch, this is Tatum," she answered, her voice brisk, professional, and laced with the subtle distraction of someone in motion. "Tatum, honey." I let my voice crack, adding a faint wheeze for effect, one that wasn't entirely an act. "I need help, having chest pains, shortness of breath." Through the receiver came the background symphony of her world, hair dryers roaring, a client asking about processing time, upbeat pop music playing to keep the salon lively. And there she was, right in the center of it all, laughing, busy, in control of everything that mattered to her. Everything except me. "Dad?" Her tone shifted to mild concern, but I could hear her moving, her voice stretching over the clatter, probably checking a timer on someone's highlights. "What kind of chest pains?" "Sharp ones, right here." I pressed my palm against my chest, letting the pressure color my words. "Mr. Peterson wants me in Columbus immediately. Heart specialist." "Columbus? Dad, that's like an hour drive. Can't you see someone local?" The question hit me like a stone dropped into deep water, small on the surface but sinking fast and heavy. It told me everything I needed to know, though I pushed ahead with my script. "Peterson says it's urgent, could be serious. Problem is, I can't drive feeling this way." And then I waited, not just for her words, but for the truth beneath them. The request was simple: $30 for a taxi, not a fortune, not a grand gesture, just enough to get me to a doctor before my chest tightened into something irreversible. There was a pause on the other end. The whir of a hairdryer swelled, then softened as she moved around the salon. "Dad, I'm right in the middle of Mrs. Henderson's color," Tatum said, and her voice clipped on with the brisk efficiency of someone juggling too many things at once. "She's getting highlights for her daughter's wedding, and if I mess up the timing—" "Tatum," I cut in, my voice rasping and low, "I might be having a heart attack." The background noise didn't falter. Hairdryers still hummed, laughter still spilled faintly from someone nearby. My emergency was competing with small talk and hair chemicals. "Can't Finnegan take you?" she asked, "or call an ambulance?" Each suggestion hit me like a small, precise blow. She wasn't trying to solve my problem. She was trying to hand it off, pass me like an unwanted errand. Finnegan's at work, I said, pressing a hand to my chest, letting the strain bleed into my voice. Ambulance costs $300. I just need $30 for a cab. Another pause. Dad, I really can't leave right now. Mrs. Henderson is our biggest tipper, and she specifically requested me. Her priorities were already lined up in perfect order, and I wasn't near the top. Maybe you could, she began, but stopped mid-sentence. Muffled, she spoke to someone else. Yes, Mrs. Henderson, another 10 minutes on the timer. When she came back on the line, her tone was different, almost lighter, transactional. Actually, since we're talking, could you lend me $80? There's this dress at Macy's I've been eyeing for the salon's anniversary party next week. All the other girls are wearing designer, and I can't show up looking cheap. The words didn't just land, they hollowed me out. I had called in a moment of vulnerability, reaching out as a father facing a possible medical crisis. In return, my daughter used the moment to angle for a shopping loan. The silence between us grew thick, almost tangible. Dad, are you there? The dress is on sale, but only until tonight. I'm here. The breathless act I'd been performing was gone now, replaced with something heavier. A real emptiness. So, can you transfer the money? She asked brightly. I've got Mrs. Henderson under the dryer, but I could run to the mall after work. I looked down at my open notebook, pen hovering over the space marked Test 1 Tatum. In neat, deliberate handwriting, I wrote, prioritize client appointments and personal shopping over father's potential heart attack. Dad, the connection's breaking up, I murmured, my voice almost a whisper. I'll figure something out. Great about the dress money. I hung up before she could answer. The kitchen seemed colder now, as though her selfishness had seeped through the phone lines and settled into the air around me. Outside, autumn leaves tumbled past the window, fragments of color falling away from their branches, just as the last illusions I had about my family were breaking loose from me. One test done, 2 more to go, but deep down, I already knew how the others would end. Tuesday afternoon arrived like an executioner, calm, inevitable, and bringing with it the systematic dismantling of the last fragile illusions I'd clung to about the people I had raised. I had spent the morning preparing the stage for the second test. Old bank statements, yellowed at the edges, were spread across my desk like relics from another life. Investment brochures and printouts from financial websites lay scattered in deliberate disarray, the perfect props to suggest a man lost in the modern jungle of money management. The low autumn light slanted through the blinds, striping the papers in alternating bars of golden shadow, as if my finances were already behind bars, waiting for someone to claim them. At precisely 4:20 p.m., I dialed Finnegan's office. TechFlow Solutions, Finnegan speaking. His voice was smooth and crisp, carrying that confident precision of a man used to issuing orders and being obeyed. Son, I said, letting a tremor of uncertainty slip into my words. I'm confused about all these investment options. Could use your expertise. Of course, Dad. What's going on? In the background, I heard the steady click of a keyboard, the casual multitasking of someone juggling priorities, a sound I knew well from his childhood when homework and video games competed for his attention. Well, I began slowly, I've got some savings just sitting in a basic account, not earning a thing. Interest rates are terrible, and now all these commercials about cryptocurrency and stocks. My voice trailed off, the picture of a man teetering on the edge of confusion, hoping his son would reach out a hand to steady him. The clicking stopped. How much are we talking about, Dad? Not, what are your goals? Not, how can I help you make sense of this? Just the raw, unvarnished question. The first one any predator asks before deciding how to pounce. How much? I kept my tone vague, knowing that uncertainty would feed his curiosity. Well, I've been careful over the years, saved a bit here and there. Dad, I need specifics to help you properly. Are we talking thousands? 10,000? More? Possibly more, I said almost casually. I could practically hear the hum of his mental calculator firing up, running scenarios, multiplying potential outcomes. That's why I need advice, I added gently. These websites are confusing. His voice shifted then, sliding into that patronizing lecture mode cadence he reserved for people he considered intellectually behind the times. Dad, basic savings accounts are financial suicide. Inflation eats your money alive every single day. I know, son. That's why I called you. Here's what we'll do, he said, quick now, decisive. Give me control of the account, and I'll move everything into a diversified cryptocurrency portfolio. I could triple your money in 6 months. And there it was. Not patient guidance, not education, but the naked power grab. The same controlling instinct I'd seen years ago when he'd lectured me about the foolishness of buying lottery tickets was now zeroing in on assets he'd only just discovered existed. Control of the account, I repeated, letting a faint note of bafflement into my voice. I thought you'd just give me advice. Dad, you don't understand modern investing. It requires constant monitoring, split-second decisions. I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting to the neat column of names in my notebook. Beside Finnegan, I left a blank space, soon to be filled with the same verdict I'd written for Tatum. The test wasn't over, but the result was already clear. You can't expect to manage complex financial instruments at your age, at my age, as if turning 68 had erased 4 decades of paying bills on time, balancing a budget, negotiating mortgage rates, and making sure there was food on the table even in the lean years, as if experience could be wiped away by a number on a birth certificate. The implication landed like a slap, not just dismissive, but insulting in its quiet certainty that I had become incompetent simply by growing older. Finnegan didn't pause to hear the indignation tightening my jaw. His voice was gathering speed now, the way a salesman senses a closing. I could set up automatic transfers, he continued smoothly, power of attorney for investment decisions. You'd still have access to spending money, of course, but the real assets would be properly managed. Properly managed by someone who understands markets. By you mean. By my own son, not offering guidance but grasping for the wheel. Then came the barb, thrown with casual precision. Dad, you waste $20 a month on those ridiculous lottery tickets. That alone proves you need professional guidance. I almost laughed. Almost. If only he knew that those ridiculous tickets had just made me wealthier than he could imagine. $700,000 after taxes, sitting quietly in my safe, waiting for someone worthy of it. Not someone who saw it as a prize to seize. I gripped the phone tighter, forcing myself to keep the frail, uncertain tone of the elderly man I was pretending to be. So you'd control my money completely? For your own good, he said without hesitation. Trust me, Dad. In 5 years, you'll thank me when your portfolio has grown exponentially. I glanced down at my open notebook, the pen already in my hand, knowing exactly what I would be writing next. This was never about teaching, never about helping. Test 2, created to see whether my son would guide or manipulate, had given its answer. He had gone straight for control. No education, no discussion of risk or goals, just a power grab wrapped in financial jargon. I need to think about this, I said, letting my words fall slowly as though weighed down by indecision. Don't think too long, he shot back. Market opportunities don't wait for hesitation. Pressure again, artificial urgency, the oldest trick in the book, designed to shut down careful thought. I'll call you back, I said, and hung up before he could push further. In my notebook, I wrote in deliberate strokes, Test 2, failed, attempted to take control of father's assets under guise of financial expertise. Immediate manipulation. No genuine education offered. 2 tests completed. 2 failures documented, 1 test remaining. The conclusion was already forming in my mind, hard and unshakable. None of my children deserved a penny of my winnings. Wednesday evening began to settle over Milford, the air heavy with the scent of cut grass and the muted chatter of neighbors heading home from work. I sat in my living room, the television murmuring the local news in the background, my notebook open beside me like a quiet witness. 2 pages already filled with the failures of people I had once believed would do right by me. The final test loomed ahead. Not because I expected redemption, but because I wanted confirmation. The truth was nearly complete. At exactly 9:45 that night, I picked up the phone and dialed Murphy's Pub. The line rang 3 times before a familiar voice broke through a haze of background noise. The clink of glasses, the rise and fall of boisterous laughter, the thud of footsteps across a worn wooden floor. A sports commentator's voice barked from a TV somewhere behind him, narrating a game that clearly held more of the room's attention than anything else in the world. "Murphy's, this is Rodri. Son, I'm in trouble." I let a tremor enter my voice. Not too much, just enough to make it sound as if the weight of the day had finally settled on my shoulders. "What's wrong?" he asked, his tone casual, distracted. I lost my wallet, Riverside Park. Must have slipped out of my pocket." The clinking quieted slightly as he shifted the phone, probably wiping down the bar with one hand while holding the receiver in the other. "Lost your wallet? Damn, that's rough. Did you cancel your credit cards yet?" I exhaled slowly. "Don't have any credit cards, but I had this week's pension money in there. $150. The bank says they can't replace the check until Monday." A pause. Somewhere behind him, a customer called out for 2 beers and a whiskey. Rodri's voice drifted away from the receiver as he said, "Hold on, Dad." I listened to the muffled sounds of drinks being poured, cash registers clinking, and glasses sliding across the bar. The familiarity of it all was almost comforting until he came back. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice steady but different now, like a man choosing his words carefully. "Wednesdays are busy." Another pause, but this one was heavier, hesitant. "Dad, I'd help you out, but I lost big at poker last night. Down $300. 300. The number echoed in my head, sharp and cold. 300, double the amount I needed to eat for the next week, gone in a single night over a deck of cards. I felt something inside me twist. "Roderick, you told me you'd stopped playing poker." "I mostly have," he replied quickly, like a child caught in a lie but unwilling to admit it. "This was just one bad night. Card games happen. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And last night," I said quietly, "you lost my week's grocery money." A sigh, then an edge crept into his voice. "Come on, Dad, don't guilt trip me." The defensiveness was instant, automatic, the tone of a man who'd spent years finding ways to avoid responsibility. He hesitated, then said, "Could you maybe sell those old tools in the garage? They're worth something." My tools. The hammers, saws, and wrenches I'd collected over 30 years. The same tools I'd used to patch roofs, fix broken furniture, and keep our home running when money was tight. They weren't just tools, they were pieces of my life's work. "You want me to sell the very things I've used to take care of this family?" I asked, my voice low. I know, he said quickly, as if my words were just another inconvenience to brush past. "But I'm tapped out right now." From across the bar, someone called his name. I could almost hear the relief in his voice at the distraction. "Listen," he added lightly, "maybe you finally hit something on those lottery tickets, huh?" The words landed like a fist to the chest, flippant, careless, and cruel in their timing. And just like that, the third test had begun to write its own damning conclusion. There I sat, the faint glow of the lamp spilling across the table. My fingers wrapped around a single slip of paper that could change anyone's life. $1 million lottery ticket. And yet, instead of feeling triumphant, I sat there listening to my own son, a man shackled by his gambling addiction, mock the very habit that had just secured my fortune. The irony was so sharp it could have cut glass. "The lottery tickets are a waste," he said, the words dripping with the same casual disdain his siblings had thrown at me for years. Then, with a half-hearted chuckle, he added, "But hey, maybe tonight's your lucky night." If only he knew. If only any of them knew. If only they understood that the father they thought of as foolish, impractical, and financially naive had already done the unthinkable and won. But that was the beauty of their ignorance. It revealed everything. It stripped away pretense and showed me who they really were when they thought I had nothing to offer. Even in the face of what I had framed as an urgent, personal emergency, Roderick's first instinct wasn't to ask how he could help. It was to dodge responsibility, sidestep sacrifice, and point me toward options that required no effort from him. So, you can't help? I asked quietly, my voice barely more than a whisper. Dad, if I had it, you know I'd give it to you, he replied, his tone almost convincing, until he added, but 300 down is 300 down. I'm barely covering rent this month. Barely covering rent because he gambled away the money that should have kept him afloat. This wasn't bad luck. This was a pattern, a cycle, irresponsibility leading to financial disaster, followed by an appeal for sympathy, or worse, an attempt to shift the problem onto someone else. I understand, I said aloud, though in my mind, understanding and accepting were two very different beasts. Maybe hit up Finnegan. He's got that IT money, Roderick suggested without missing a beat. There it was again, passing the responsibility along, as if love for family was a burden to be outsourced. Never own your choices. Never give what might cost you something. I'll figure something out, I told him, the words flat and final. Sorry, Dad, really. Hey, if my luck changes tonight, I'll call you. And then the line went dead. Not even a proper goodbye, just the sound of him returning to serve another customer. Slipping seamlessly back into the rhythm of an evening spent earning money he would, no doubt, lose at his next poker game. I stared at the silent phone for a long moment, then slowly closed my notebook, pressing the cover down until it lay flush. The final test was complete. 3 children, 3 carefully designed opportunities to show me that they valued love over self-interest, and 3 spectacular failures. The sacrifices I had asked for were so small, they were almost laughable. $30, a piece of honest financial advice, or the loan of $150. None had passed, not one, but in the silence of my kitchen, I knew there was still someone who might. My eyes fell to the bottom of my contact list, to a number I'd saved 2 years ago at Margaret's funeral. My nephew Ellis. He had never asked me for anything. Tomorrow I would call him. Tomorrow I would see what true family loyalty looked like. As the evening deepened into night, Thursday wrapped itself around my empty house like a shroud. The television murmured in the other room, but I barely heard it. The ticket sat beside me, unassuming, a quiet reminder that fortune had already chosen me, and now it was my turn to choose who would share in it. I sat in my old recliner, the worn leather cool beneath my hands. The familiar creak of its frame, a quiet reminder of how many years I'd spent in this exact spot. Resting on my lap was the notebook, its pages now filled with neat, undeniable records of 3 separate failures. 3 tests I had set for my own children, each designed to be simple, each requiring so little sacrifice, and yet each one ending in disappointment. My eyes drifted toward the fireplace. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the embers inside. Once, on autumn nights like this, Margaret and I would sit here together, she in her favorite chair, me with a book or the evening paper, sharing quiet conversations or simply enjoying the silence. But now the silence was different, heavier. It pressed against my chest, weighed down by the truth I'd been avoiding. I had raised 3 people who were strangers to me, bound to me by blood, but not by loyalty, compassion, or even genuine care. At 7:30, the phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The sound cut through the heavy quiet like a sudden ray of light piercing storm clouds. I picked it up, and before I could speak, a familiar voice greeted me. Uncle Harlan! Ellis's voice was warm, genuine, like a hand reaching through the distance between us. Just 2 words, but they carried more affection than I'd heard from my own children in weeks. Something in my chest tightened. Ellis, son, I said, leaning forward slightly. Good to hear from you. Mom mentioned there's been some family stress, he said. I called her last weekend, and she told me Tatum and the guys have been, well, demanding lately. You doing okay? For a moment, I didn't answer. I just listened to his voice, steady, concerned, free of the guarded tone I'd grown used to from my own kids. When had any of my children last asked if I was all right without first easing into it with some favor they needed? I'm managing, I said at last. You know how it is with family. I do, actually, he replied, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. Probably grading assignments. Ellis had been teaching at the community college in Toledo for a few years now. That's kind of why I'm calling. You've always been, well, too generous with everyone. Sometimes people take advantage of that. The word struck deeper than he probably intended. Take advantage. Yes, that's exactly what had been happening. 3 failed tests had proved it. You might be right about that, Ellis, I said quietly. Look, I know it's not really my place, and I'm way down here in Toledo, he went on. But if you need anything, money, help around the house, just company, I'm here. I could drive up this weekend if you want. I stared down at the notebook still sitting closed on my lap, then at the phone in my hand. Ellis was offering help without being asked, without knowing what it might cost him, without expecting anything in return. In just a few sentences, he'd done what my own children hadn't been able or willing to do in years. That's very kind of you, son, I murmured. It's not kindness, he said firmly. It's family, real family. His conviction carried an echo of his father, my brother, a man who had lived and breathed loyalty. Uncle Harlan, Ellis added after a pause, I've always looked up to you. And after Dad died, you were the one who made sure I had what I needed for college. You probably don't even remember half the things you did for me. But I do, every single one. Oh, I remembered. I remembered the look in his eyes when I'd handed him his first set of dorm keys, the quiet pride in knowing I was giving him the start in life his father would have wanted. And now, all these years later, it was Ellis, not my children, who was reminding me what loyalty truly looked like. $2,000. That's what it had taken to set Ellis on his way. Money for textbooks, a dorm deposit, and living expenses when Tom's insurance payout had fallen short. I'd given it without a second thought, the same way a man might hand a lifeline to someone drowning. Ellis had been just a boy then, still raw from losing his father, but determined. And in the months that followed, he'd done something few ever do. He wrote handwritten letters every few weeks telling me about his grades, his classes, his hopes of becoming a teacher. Not just thank you once, but over and over, woven into updates on his progress. Those letters had shown me more than his words. They showed me the kind of man he was becoming. You paid every penny of that back, Ellis, I told him now, my voice quieter than I expected. Not just the money, though you did that too, but in the way you carried yourself. You taught me that debts matter, that responsibility matters, and more than that, you showed me what love really looks like. On the other end of the line, I heard him moving around his apartment, maybe pacing, maybe just shifting between rooms. I'm sorry my cousins don't see that, and he said. My cousins, not as siblings, not as family. He understood the difference between sharing blood and sharing loyalty better than the children I had raised myself. Ellis, I said, my throat tightening, you've always been special. Your father would be proud of the man you've become. I learned from good examples, he replied softly. You and Dad, mostly you, after he passed. There was a pause, then his voice firmed. Uncle Harlan, I'm serious about helping. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, no questions asked. No questions asked. The exact opposite of every conversation I'd had with my own children in years. They always had questions. How much? When? What do I get in return? Why can't you handle it yourself? I appreciate that more than you know, I told him. Family takes care of family, he said simply. That's what you taught me. After we hung up, I stayed in my recliner for a long while, the phone still warm in my hand. Ellis hadn't called to get something. He'd called because he'd heard I might need something. He'd offered help without conditions. He'd asked about my well-being without calculating the cost. And he'd remembered, truly remembered, the kindness I'd once shown him, instead of treating it like an unending obligation. I reached for my notebook and flipped it open to a blank page. At the top, I wrote, Ellis Whitaker, True Family. Below that, I began making notes, mapping out exactly how to ensure that the kind of loyalty Ellis had shown would be honored. The lottery ticket locked in my safe wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to someone who understood. A week later, I was driving toward Columbus, the documents resting in an envelope on the passenger seat. They would change everything. The October morning air was cool and clean, rich with the scent of fallen leaves. Golden sunlight spilled in slanting beams across my windshield as I navigated through the bustle of downtown traffic toward the Ohio Lottery Commission building. Every mile I drove, the weight in my chest felt lighter, because for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly who my family was. I pulled into the government parking lot, the October air cool enough to nip at my cheeks as I stepped out of the truck. In my hand was a manila envelope, tucked firmly under my arm, the way a corporate man might carry a stack of high-stakes contracts. Only mine didn't hold merger documents or legal briefs. It held the single slip of paper that had ignited weeks of tension, disappointment, and clarity in equal measure. Inside, a uniformed guard gave me a quick once-over and pointed me toward the elevators. Third floor. I rode up in silence, my reflection in the mirrored walls looking oddly calm for a man about to change his life. The receptionist at the front desk had kind eyes and a smile that felt more genuine than most I'd seen lately. She checked her computer, then looked back up at me with professional warmth. "Mr. Whitaker, congratulations. Ms. Rodriguez will be with you shortly." A few minutes later, I was ushered into an office that smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paper. Maria Rodriguez greeted me with a handshake that was firm, but not rushed. She looked about Finnegan's age, early 40s maybe, dressed in a well-tailored navy suit that matched the steady professionalism in her eyes. Behind her desk, the walls were lined with framed photographs. Everyday people holding oversized checks, their faces lit up with disbelief, tears, and joy. The kind of joy that comes when an unexpected turn changes everything. "Please have a seat," she said, taking her place behind the desk. "Let's start by verifying your ticket." I slid the small piece of paper across to her. The ticket that had been sitting in my safe, quietly holding more power over my family's future than any of them could imagine. She slipped it under a special scanner, the machine humming softly as she checked the numbers against her computer screen. After a moment, she looked up with a satisfied nod. "Confirmed. $1 million jackpot. October 10th drawing. You, Mr. Whitaker, are officially our newest winner." Her smile was warm, almost conspiratorial, like she was letting me in on a secret. "How does it feel to be a millionaire?" I almost told her the truth, that it felt like vindication, like justice served cold after years of being bled dry by people who mistook kindness for weakness. Instead, I caught myself. "Surprising," I said lightly. "Very surprising." She launched into the details. Federal taxes would claim 37%, the state another 4%, leaving me with roughly $700,000. I could take it in 20 annual installments or as a single lump sum. That choice was easy. "Lump sum," I said. "I have specific plans for this money." Her pen scratched across the forms. "Excellent. Let's get the paperwork started." For the next 45 minutes, we went through the formalities, signing document after document, providing identification, setting up tax withholdings, and confirming the bank where the deposit would go. She explained optional financial advisory services, reminded me of the state's media policy, and rattled off practical considerations like she'd done this 100 times before. When the last form was signed, she reached it into a drawer and handed me a check. It was just a thin rectangle of paper, so light it barely registered in my hand, and yet it carried the weight of every sacrifice, every disappointment, and every moment of clarity I'd had in recent months. "Congratulations again, Mr. Whitaker," she said. "Any immediate plans for your winnings?" I didn't hesitate. "Taking care of family," I said. Then, with a small pause, I added quietly, "The family that deserves it." On my way home, I made a detour. Riverside Park was quiet that time of day, the Scioto River glinting under the afternoon sun. I found a bench near the water and sat for a long while, the check resting on my lap. It felt almost alive in my hands, not because of what it could buy, but because of who it would and wouldn't go to. $700,000. More money than I had managed to earn in the last 15 years combined. But sitting there on that bench overlooking the Scioto River, I realized the amount itself wasn't the part that swelled my chest with satisfaction. What truly mattered was what it represented: a restoration of balance, the righting of a scale that had been tilted far too long. It wasn't just a windfall, it was justice in its purest, quietest form. Ellis would receive $500,000 in the house, not as charity, but as a deliberate choice to reward the kind of loyalty and love that asked for nothing in return. Enough for him to wipe away any remaining teaching-related debts, to buy himself the freedom to pursue graduate school without fear of bills stacking on his desk, or maybe to spend summers traveling, expanding the kind of mind that makes the world better. This was money going exactly where it should, into the hands of someone who had shown time and again that care and kindness weren't bargaining chips. The remaining $200,000 would be mine, to carry me comfortably through whatever years I had left. Enough to live without ever needing to extend my hand toward my own children again, sparing me the sting of their sighs, the subtle rolls of their eyes, the sense that my needs were burdens to be managed rather than opportunities to show love. With this, they would never again have the chance to manipulate my circumstances for their gain or use my dependence as leverage. That chapter was closed, permanently. A breeze swept down the riverbank, carrying with it the scent of wet leaves and that cool, invigorating promise only autumn can bring. The promise of change. Gold and amber leaves drifted lazily past my bench, each one tumbling and turning, like pieces of my old life being carried away. I knew tomorrow would not be just another day. Tomorrow I would make a call to my children. I would invite them to dinner. And at that dinner they would learn, perhaps for the first time in their lives, that actions have consequences, that love is worth more than inheritance, and that the man they had quietly dismissed as naive had, in fact, been quietly keeping score all along. I folded the check with care and slid it into my wallet, tucking it beside the small scrap of paper that held Ellis's phone number. That simple pairing, a promise of wealth and a reminder of love, felt like my new life distilled into two objects. Tomorrow would be the reckoning they had earned, forged not out of spite, but out of truth. By Saturday evening, I found myself pulling into the gravel lot of the Rusty Anchor, the final stage for this long-brewing family drama. I sat in the car for a moment, letting the engine tick itself into silence, my hands resting on the leather folder that held the lottery documents. I checked them one last time, the winning ticket, the official claim verification, and the folded check that was about to rewrite the story of our family. Inside, Linda greeted me with her familiar warmth and, as if fate had a sense of humor, led us to the same table as before. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. It felt almost ceremonial. Tatum was the first to arrive, her children in tow, the air around her buzzing with that subtle edge of distraction she always carried when money was on her mind. Finnegan walked in with Sarah, his eyes scanning the room like a man perpetually calculating. Roderick arrived last, for once on time, his grin a little too wide as if eager to prove something. They slid into their usual patterns without thought, Tatum squinting at the cheapest options on the menu, Finnegan scrutinizing the wine list for the best ratio of price to prestige, Roderick confidently ordering the most expensive steak without so much as glancing at the cost. "So what's the occasion this time, Dad?" Finnegan asked once we had ordered. His tone was polite but tinged with suspicion. "2 family dinners in 2 weeks isn't really your style." I smiled faintly, cutting into my chicken with deliberate precision. "Just wanted to see everyone," I replied, keeping my voice light. The conversation unfolded like a well-worn script. Tatum brought up her children's looming school expenses. Finnegan casually mentioned an incredible investment opportunity he'd been looking into. Roderick complained about how his tips had been slow lately, his tone suggesting the universe itself had conspired against him. Through it all, I waited. None of them asked about my health. None asked about the silence in my home since the last dinner, or how I'd been spending my days. Their questions, like always, orbited around themselves. When Linda returned with dessert, apple pie for the grandkids, coffee for the adults, I knew the curtain was about to rise on the real reason we were here. My heart beat steady, not from nerves but from the weight of knowing that what came next would finally, irrevocably, draw the line between family in name and family in truth. I rested my coffee cup gently on the table, the porcelain making the faintest tap against the wood. My hands were steady, not because I wasn't nervous, but because I had been preparing for this moment for 2 long, deliberate weeks. "I have something to tell you all," I began, my voice calm, almost conversational. The clinking of forks stopped. Even the grandchildren, half buried in their glowing screens, lifted their eyes toward me. I won the lottery 2 weeks ago. The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke, curling and lingering. Silence. Absolute and complete. Not the kind of silence born from awe, but the heavy, calculating stillness of people who suddenly realize the ground beneath them has shifted. Tatum broke it first, her tone sharp with disbelief. Won what lottery? She said it the way you'd ask someone if they were joking about finding buried treasure, a tone layered with suspicion and habit, as though she'd long trained herself not to expect much from me. Without a word, I reached inside my jacket, fingers brushing over the envelope I'd kept close to my heart all night. I slid the slip of paper onto the table, my winning ticket, face up like an ace revealed in a high-stakes game. $1 million, I said evenly. October 10th drawing. Here's the ticket. Finnegan's hand shot out first. He held it under the light, scanning the numbers with the concentration of a man defusing a bomb. I could see the recognition dawning in his eyes before he even spoke. These are the numbers you always play, he murmured, glancing up. Family birthdays. Mom's, yours, your siblings, even Ellis's. Rodri leaned forward, his voice catching in his throat. $1 million. Dad, are you serious? I reached into the envelope again, this time laying out the official verification letter from the Lottery Commission, and beside it, the folded check. The pale blue rectangle looked unassuming, but its weight in this moment was immeasurable. $700,000 after taxes, I said quietly. Right here. The transformation in their faces was immediate, and exactly what I had expected. Tatum's eyes glistened, but not from pride or happiness. Her gaze was fixed on the check like a drowning woman spotting a lifeline. Finnegan leaned forward, shoulders squared, the predator's body language of someone positioning himself to seize control. Rodri stared at the paper as if he could will the ink to rearrange into his salvation. Dad, this is incredible, Tatum said, her hand inching toward the documents as if proximity alone might make her a beneficiary. We need to be smart about this. The kids' college funds, my mortgage. Actually, Finnegan cut in smoothly, the first step should be putting it into the right investments. Dad, you'll need professional financial management. Hold on. My voice was quiet, but it sliced through their overlapping ambitions like a blade. They froze, their eyes snapping to mine. Before anyone starts planning how to spend my money, I said, I need to tell you about the past 2 weeks. Confusion flickered across their faces. Tatum, Monday the 14th, I began. I called you. I told you I had chest pains and needed $30 for a taxi to a heart specialist. You said you were too busy, but you asked me for $80 for a dress. Her mouth fell slightly open, her color draining. Dad, Finnegan, Tuesday the 15th. I asked you for investment advice about a small amount of savings. Instead of helping me understand my options, you tried to take control of my money. That was professional guidance, he protested weakly. I turned to Rodri. Wednesday the 16th. I told you I'd lost my wallet. My pension money was gone. You said you couldn't help because you'd lost $300 gambling. Rodri's lips parted, but no words came. His gaze dropped to the table. Each of you, I continued, my voice steady but colder now, failed a very simple test. When your father needed help, truly needed help, you all looked first to your own wants, your own gain. I let the weight of that truth settle over the table. For the first time all evening, none of them could meet my eyes. When I had reached out for small amounts, a taxi fare, a bit of emergency cash, you had either refused outright or twisted the moment into an opportunity to push your own agenda. The memory of each rejection settled like stones in my chest as I sat there, surrounded by the hum of the restaurant. Around us, life carried on without pause. Forks clinked gently against plates, a birthday song rose from a table in the corner, and the warm Saturday night glow wrapped other families in the comfort of togetherness. For them, this was just another evening. For us, it was the night our family's facade cracked open, the truth spilling out for everyone at the table to see. But Ellis, I continued, letting the name hang in the air just long enough to draw every gaze toward me. The moment I spoke it, their expressions shifted, resentment, curiosity, and something darker flashing in their eyes. Ellis called Thursday evening, and I said, no agenda, no hidden motive, just to check on how I was holding up after hearing there was tension in the family. I could still hear his voice, steady, genuine, offering not just words, but help without hesitation. Money, time, company, whatever I needed, without me even asking. Tatum's voice cut through the air, sharp and brittle with panic. He's not even your son. No, I agreed, my voice steady, but he understands what family means. Real family. I rose from my chair slowly, the decision that had been taking shape for days now solidifying into something unshakable. Ellis will receive $500,000 and the house. He's earned it, not through blood, but through respect and genuine care. The reaction was volcanic. Tatum's composure shattered, tears spilling down her cheeks. These weren't the crocodile tears she'd used in the past to manipulate. They were raw, messy, born of rage and desperation. Finnegan's face tightened as the wheels turned behind his eyes, calculating angles, already mapping out potential legal loopholes. His voice grew louder, fueled by a cocktail of indignation and entitlement loss. Rodri didn't move at first. He just stared down at the table, shoulders slumping under the weight of a truth that had finally caught up to him. A slow-moving storm darkening his features. Dad, you can't be serious, Tatum sobbed. We're your children. Children, I said quietly, who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with legs. Children who mocked me for buying lottery tickets until those tickets paid out. Then suddenly they became your golden ticket. I pulled my wallet from my pocket, took out exact change for my meal, and set it on the table. The sound of the coins was small, but it carried the finality of a closing door. Ellis never asked for anything, I said, my voice firm, and that's exactly why he deserves everything. Beside me, Sarah, silent until now, laid a gentle hand on my arm. Mr. Whitaker, I know you're hurt, but maybe... Sarah, I said softly, you're a good woman, and I'm sorry you're married to someone who sees his father as a resource instead of a human being. I turned and walked toward the restaurant's exit. Behind me, their voices rose in a chaotic chorus of protests, accusations, and frantic bargaining. None of it mattered anymore. Outside, the autumn air wrapped around me, cool, crisp, and cleansing. It felt like my first real breath in weeks. I reached my car, sat behind the wheel, and pulled out my phone. Ellis's name lit up the screen as I scrolled to his number. My thumb hovered for only a moment before pressing call. It was time to tell my real heir that his life was about to change forever. Justice, I realized, doesn't always roar with triumph. Sometimes it's the quiet satisfaction of walking away from people who never deserved your love in the first place. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box to the left. Thank you for watching.